Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today in the show, we have Carlo Mahfouz. He's a technology executive, and we're going to talk about his book, Reality Check, In Pursuit of the Right Questions. Carlo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's great to be here.
We'll get into your book and excerpt in a little bit. First off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Absolutely. So I'm originally from Lebanon. I immigrated to the States a couple of years back. I've been in the healthcare edtech industry now for over a decade. I work mostly on the technology side, simulation, debriefing, software, all of that good stuff. And recently I went on the journey of writing a book. The book actually touches a little bit more outside just the tech side, but involves a little bit more on a philosophical question of how we can improve and how we can tackle things much better. My experience has been predominantly in the technology, but now lately have been shaping more on the leadership side and how we can do better, improve our decision making, asking the right questions, things along those lines.
So you're approaching the healthcare field from the technology side. So looking at it through that lens, what are some surprising things about the healthcare field that you've experienced over the last few years?
Yeah, a great question. I think technology has gone so far, but the healthcare industry has not caught on to what is even possible. And in the education side, that's definitely has been true. We've seen so many advancement on what you can do on the training side, skills training, improving that. And yet, I think because of the constraints that have been implied on the healthcare sector in general, both in patient care and both on the training and education side, it has been having difficulty like catching up to it. And we've been trying to push that limit even further.
So when you talk about those constraints, what would be an example of a healthcare constraint that would limit how far we can go from a technology standpoint?
Absolutely. So let's talk about AMRs or digital health records, for example. Like most institutions today are at capacity or struggling with having the necessary capacity. You introduce a new technology, you need to have the onboarding, the time, right? The doctors don't necessarily have the time to either upscale to gain and learn that system, but at the same time, it is super valuable when it's implemented, but to get there, there is this gap and there needs to be a breathing room usually for that to happen. Change does not happen instantly. So I found even on the education side, that's similar. Today, we can do so many things with simulators. They're pretty complex systems in general, but super extremely helpful in changing the experience of what we can do and like how you can have more tangible, hands-on experience when you are simulating any type of ailment, whether airway management, you name it. So the struggle usually ends up coming down to two things. These days, I don't see it as financial because financial always is a constraint for sure, but sometimes capacity and having the time to onboard on that competency and the willingness to do so. And those are real challenges. And it's not necessarily lack of willingness per se, but lack of time, lack of focus and energy to be going in that direction.
All right, let's talk more about your book. It's titled Reality Check, In Pursuit of the Right Questions. And it's about exploring different tactics, mental models, and mindsets that improve our ability to identify ourselves and ask the right questions to solve complex problems. And I know that whole mindset is very relevant to what we do in healthcare. So from a healthcare lens, tell my audience some of the main messages from your book that readers should come away with.
Absolutely. So the book is targeting, as I said, a little bit of the prioritization, how we can be present, paying attention to the real problems and challenges. And I think healthcare is one of the main key. If anything, we learned from COVID and when that hit is there's so many things we could have done better, probably, or be more prepared. And suddenly we weren't. No one to blame. It's just a lot of circumstances. So in my book, what I try to approach is how we can leverage this reality check moment, which I consider it as a really clear read of the now, like a clear assessment of where we are today to be able to prioritize and pay attention. And that, to me, I broke it down into a little bit of 4 lenses: context, which plays a big part. What is the context? What is the environment? How we're managing it? I think in healthcare as well, you are in emergency, it's one context. You are in the clinic, it's a different context. You are at the hospital, like different setups imply different ways of how you handle the situation, even if it's the same problem. And then second is time. We have this relationship. I think even in healthcare, time is a huge key element. Like 4 minutes before you go into hypoxia, 1 minute after there is extreme constraints on what the time you use. So it's an important lens to look at it when we're looking at problems as well. How do you find what we've learned from the past and how we can manage that with our expectations from the future and how we can really be present in that moment. And the last aspect is observer. In simulation, we do a lot of debriefing. Usually we record and have these debriefing elements, which you doing the action is one thing, you observing it and learning from it is another. So there is this element of when we're observing what's happening and remove our biases, remove our actually involvement, understanding all of these dimensions, how we can learn better and how that can improve where we go. So these are the three kind of pillars I built the book around. I think they touch in from my experience in healthcare and technology, and I try to bring all of these dimensions into it to give us a better structure to work with.
So I'm a primary care physician. Give us an example or a scenario of a problem and how you can utilize your framework that you just mentioned and apply it to a problem that a primary care physician would typically see.
So I recently was at a conference where we were doing airway management training, and it was really interesting to observe. So we had a whole simulation set up, and then we had the mannequin, we had the debriefing capabilities and everyone going through. And one of the interesting aspect is you could see, and the training was for surgeons. So this is someone who's already has the experience and been involved. But sometimes the rigor of actually doing the action under certain context changes. So for example, when you are under pressure, you behave one way. When you are at ease, you behave another way, right? And sometimes the subtleties, those things which we don't necessarily always pay attention to, make the biggest difference in whether you're able to accomplish what you need to do or not. So when I look at those kind of problems, I would say you can either eliminate these elements or you introduce them. And once you introduce them, you can simulate a certain type of thinking on what might be happening. And usually we're emotional beings. We have, as much as we say we're objective, and I think in healthcare we try to be as much as, there is always a bias which exists irrespective, like you cannot escape it. And that's okay as long as we recognize it. And as soon as you recognize it, you're able to redefine the problem, reframe it and how you see it, and probably get a better, different solution. So in that context, usually what ends up happening is you start to see that, oh, okay, this is not the problem I was facing. In that context specifically, is someone bagging, like the pressure on the mask, like the hand position, like you start to notice things you thought you already know, because the technique, I don't have a health fair, but the technique looks simple. But then when you try to implement it, it's actually more complicated than it feels. And then the duration, you're sitting there with this for 4 minutes. So this is the time element. Yeah, I can do this for 1 minute. Do that for 4 minutes and you're stressed out. It's a whole different way of what ends up happening. And this is where usually the errors happen, or you have the problem start surfacing. Once you start introducing these elements into your thinking, into the problem you're facing, then suddenly you realize, oh, it's a different type of issue that I have. The technique is not the problem. It's probably the duration or my stamina or my posture that I'm taking. So that the framework like structure is like, it's a little bit abstract, it's high level. When you bring it down, it comes to like these elements, like context, environment, the time, and elements of what I already know as well, because usually we have these pre-assumptions that already we know, and as soon as those kick in, we no longer open to see something new. And then of course, on the observing part, observing even our thoughts as in addition to just what's happening, just gives us a different reflection on them, that we're able to see it differently.
We're talking to Carlo Mahfouz. He's a technology executive, and we're talking about his book, Reality Check: In Pursuit of the Right Questions. In a description of your book, it says that your book will help identify ourselves and ask the right questions to solve complex problems. Now, from that framework, what kind of specific advice do you have for physicians? Any actionable tips that you could offer them?
Yeah, on the action side, I think, especially for physician, is I think today we should be looking for only new opportunities and keep a window for opportunities. I think one of the biggest thing I advocate for is we do all of these things to be present, to leave a window for opportunity to see the things we've never even know as a solution or possible outcome. And that's sometimes hard, especially for a physician with years of training, years of experience, years of trying to encapsulate that window to the unknown is very difficult. And I think if we can even leave a little bit of that open, it allows for so much potential on how we can solve problems in healthcare, whether that by introducing technology elements, like and understanding that it's not that easy. I know it's not as simple as say, okay, like now use this and it will work. But leaving that window of opportunity can accelerate things and can allow for much better questions to be asked, a whole different dimension, which we might not have explored.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
I would say in the healthcare, especially, like embracing ambiguity in a world which is so uncertain is a really big thing. But I think we do have so many tools in our hands, and it's a matter of giving them a chance. And I think even if you look at Zoom and what it brought as technology, we didn't really give it a chance till COVID hit and we leverage it. I think in healthcare it's similar. From simulation, different types of simulators, different types of new methodologies, I think that can allow us and help us to leap forward.
Carlo, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It was great to be here.